Hey, deserving listeners, Johnny Depp, Amber Heard trial. Let's watch. My name is Dr. Kirk Honda. I'm a therapist and a professor. Let's watch.
Michelle, can you pull up 272, please? And after you both...
Okay, there was that moment where the entire internet believed that she was posing for the flash of a picture. And when I started seeing those posts going around on Reddit and other places, I was immediately skeptical. And then I started looking into it further, and I realized what was really happening. And now when I see it live, not live, but in the context of everything that's happening, yeah, it was ridiculous. Now, you could claim that some people on the internet were just trolling, but there seemed to be a lot of people believing that this was what was happening, that she was posing for a picture. Now, the internet is available to a lot of people on the planet. There's a bell curve of intelligence, of media savvy, of age, and so can some people on the internet be extremely confused about how to look at things and biased? Absolutely. None of us would think otherwise. But anyway, so it's clear that she had snot and she was using her Kleenex. And if you've ever had, I have constant allergies, as some of you know, 24/7. And it's not a pretty thing to try to deal with. And when you're dealing with it, sometimes you have ways of managing the Kleenex or the handkerchief so that you don't have to expose people to the method of trying to dry out your nose. I think she was doing that. And then you clearly see both of their screens light up because the attorney is saying, please show this one item. And there's a flipping of different screens that's happening in both the screens. Let's rewatch this. But the larger point here is that the amount of people within a span of 24 hours that believed that she would do that really points, one, to the bias that people had against her. You know, did she defame? Was she liable? The jury thinks so. I think the majority of those who have watched every bit of the trial believe so. A lot of the attorneys off the record will tell me they believe that she's liable. So that is fact, but not that she's liable, but that most people agree that she's liable, including the jury, which is the main thing that matters. And, well, according to Johnny Depp, it's the main thing that matters is the public. But okay, but the bias and the bullying and the distortion of a section of people on the internet about Amber Heard, and I suppose Johnny Depp as well, is something that we should all reflect on, and how we ourselves might be subject to that. In fact, there was a picture of a politician like 15 years ago, 20 years ago, that was photoshopped, and it was a politician that I didn't like. And it was a picture that was going around, and it was at a time when photoshopping pictures wasn't really well known. And so I was just, but I knew that that could be done, and I was tricked into believing that this one picture of this politician was true. And I said so at a dinner party or something, and people were like, in fact, my cousin was like, Kirk, do you know that picture was faked? And I'm like, it was? I'm like, oh my God, how embarrassing. So I'll never forget that. And I really just had to look at myself and say, okay, I'm not going to vote for that politician, but what does it say about me and my filter that I would believe that picture hook, line, and sinker? And when I now look at the picture in that light, of course it's fake, because why would that picture exist? I mean, it's so ridiculous, but it plays into the narrative that I had about that politician. And for people thinking that Amber Heard is evil, then I guess this plays into it. And so, and the other thing, again, as I said before, they don't allow flash photography in court. Why would they? That would be obnoxious. So but let's rewind that. Just really see the public hysteria that was going around about this extremely mundane 3 seconds of video.
Please.
You see it, right? Both their screens go pop because they're flipping through screens. One's brighter than the other. And she's clearly trying to dig stuff out of her nose delicately without exposing everyone to her method. She has a lot of snot, and she has more testimony she has to give, and that's all that it is. The other thing that people would claim is that she's faking her crying. I have yet to see that, honestly. And again, I'll remind people of all those memes and the filters going out, just making fun of her. You know, she's a human being with emotions. Is she lying? A lot of people agree that she is, but that doesn't justify any of the things that we saw. But anyway, let's rewind it again. When people look back at this time in history, I'm going to take a guess, and this is the grumpy moment, this moment, the way that she testifies, maybe a particular moment when she's testifying about the picture or something. I think those are going. So I just want to highlight that history was being made as she is innocently trying to sop up her nose water and the computer flashes on her face. Anyway, let's rewind.
Michelle, can you pull up 272, please? And after you both returned to L.A., did Mr. Depp communicate with you by text while you were...
All right, so to catch you up, Amber Heard is testifying that Johnny Depp was trying to get Amber Heard not to work. He, according to her, was very jealous. He didn't want her to do sex scenes or nude scenes. He didn't want her dressing a certain way. And he also just kind of wanted her at home a lot. I think one could argue he wants to control her based on his jealousy. It seems like there is some evidence of that. It could be all lies, but I imagine there's some truth to that. If I were to put my money down on something, I would say that he was jealous, particularly when he was intoxicated. It would come out a lot, and he would get triggered around that, and he would express wishes that she would not work as much, so that wouldn't trigger his jealousy. And that doesn't make it right, but that he wasn't extremely abusive or maybe abusive at all about those conversations. She even said that she voluntarily started to take roles to please him, not because he was forcing her to do that, but because she became essentially gaslit into believing that she shouldn't be doing those things, even though there's nothing wrong with her being an actor, right? Because he can be an actor and be in scenes with other people, but she can't or something. So I don't know, that all sounded credible to me, but you can make your own judgment about that. They get into a big fight about Clive Barker, who is involved in filmmaking, and she really wanted to work with him, and her claim is that Johnny Depp was being very jealous of that. And so apparently they had some big fight, and then the next day or something, Johnny Depp texts this, and apparently he calls her Slim and he calls himself Steve. I think we might have heard some testimony as to why that is, but I don't remember. Slim, I love you so. I am truly sorry to have upset you to the degree that I have, and I couldn't be more sorry for yet again ruining your day. I do, of course, take your generosity, your selflessness, your affection, and your sweet doting deeply into my heart. So just chiming in here, that points to that notion that I've been building over the various different testimonies, that she would at times very much dote on him and was codependent in that way, or at the very least very caring for him. He needed a lot of care, and she was there often to do that. Obviously not all the time, according to the evidence, but some of the time, and he's acknowledging that right there. And probably the most obvious example of that is when he's threatening to cut himself with a knife, and she's like, no, he says here. And I think that I've been reciprocal on that, meaning, and I think that I've been selfless and generous and affectionate and doting to you. Agony is never the answer to any equation or occasion, nor is rage. So that's him admitting that he was rageful, I think, indirectly anyway. We are, I believe, in concert about this. So that sentence kind of tells me maybe he's saying, it's my fault, I was rageful, but, you know, we both agree that both of us shouldn't be rageful towards each other. I think that's what it means. Again, I could be reading it. Please know that my apology is sincere and solid, and as stupid as it sounds, I hope your meeting with Clive Barker, the filmmaker, or and film person, is excellent. I hope your meeting with him is excellent. I love you so very effing much, my all, Steve. So this text lends credence to Amber Heard's testimony about his jealousy, about his rage about that, about the specific fight about Clive Barker. And then she says, thank you for your words, which is a nice way to respond to that. And then she says, I just left Betty Sue's, just going a couple of blocks away for a quick dinner or drink with Megan. I hope we can see each other when I get home. I don't want this agony, nor can I bear putting it on you. So that last sentence appears to be admitting for herself that she also was rageful or or created agony in him unfairly. And so if I didn't know anything about this couple and I read this, I would assume that you had two people who were rageful towards each other and said a lot of really horrible things. And then the next day, they're both having this. And I'm guessing, I hope you've had texts or conversations like this in your relationship. I hope that you're not being abusive to each other, but at the very least, you lose your temper, you say things that are unfair, or, during a conflict, or you stomp off or something. And it's a good idea to, if you can, to send a text. Sometimes it's easier to send a text. Sometimes it's easier to express ourselves through written word as opposed to in person. And so whatever is a way that makes you comfortable, get it out and apologize and try to bridge the gap and take responsibility, which it appears that they're both doing that. And once again, I think we're seeing into their relationship. It provides more context and it does provide more landscape to the picture. If you just go off the headlines, their relationship was toxic. They were constantly yelling at each other. She was controlling him and abusive. But you see probably, and this was the case of the couples that I treat along these lines, even if one is absolutely a perpetrator, the vast majority of the time, their relationship was good. It was normal. There was just these flashpoints that would just be awful. That's important to know because I think the public believes otherwise. And also, if you're in a relationship where 99% of the time it is good, but there's flashes of abuse, you might say, well, it only happens every once in a while. They're really great. And other times I'm not being abused when that is an abusive relationship. The other thing I'll say is that, once again, the Amber Heard team is presenting evidence that I don't think necessarily really prove. Now, I guess it does prove the jealousy point because that's pretty strong evidence right there in terms of what Johnny Depp is admitting to. And he's not using super flowery speech right now, by the way. So I think it helps in the situation to really get a clear statement from Johnny Depp. It could mean a lot of different things, but it looks to be in support of what Amber Heard was saying. But it also shows that he's taking responsibility and he's apologizing. And he's apologizing much more readily and much more in depth than we've ever seen from Amber Heard. So to the jury, it could be like, okay, but at least Johnny Depp can apologize and take responsibility. We haven't seen that in Amber Heard at all. Or maybe there's a little bit of it there. You can't see it on that screen, but I can see it on mine. Nor can I bear putting it on you. So, yeah, interesting. All right, so this next text from Johnny Depp, it says here, it's a way, I've let it go, went too far. I tend to do that. I always regret it when I jump, or worse, when you jump. I don't want to be conditioned to continue that behavior. Therefore, I'll put in heavy work with shrink. With shrink. I'm sorry for being less, for your disappointment in me, for my behavior. I'm an effing savage. Gotta lose that. The devil is all around, right? I wish I were able to bring even just a glimmer of a smile to that pretty face of my most gorgeous of dreams and darkest nightmares. I love you far too much for you and I to be these heinous, slinging insults like we did. So just chiming in here, he is taking responsibility, but he's also occasionally acknowledging, like, well, you do this to me. It is not anything that I am particularly proud of to have participated in, and I regret giving it life because MFer, how when we fight, little girl? How do we end up on the very edge of the precipice? And why? Wish I knew, goddamn. And no, you are right. I am well aware that I should have been bigger than the moment, and that I will never again manifest in negative experiences. It can be done. What a killer concept to visualize. Wish you were in this lunatic's proximity. Please be careful out there. I adore you. Yeah, so I think he's similar to other texts that we've seen along these lines. He's taking responsibility. He's acknowledging the rage and the slinging insults and being savage, but also acknowledging that you do this too. Now, in another context, if I read this, might this indicate that we have an abusive person who is trying to drag the victim into their world and say, well, you do this too, when they don't really, or they're only defending themselves? Yeah, maybe. But I think given all the evidence, it looks like they were yelling at each other and he feels bad about it and wants to recover the relationship and is saying that. I imagine, I don't know, that it was mostly verbal, maybe not violent at all, physical, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is a reference to a lot of verbal aggression, really horrific aggression verbally to each other, but mutual and not violent. But I don't know.
The language he used after particularly violent episodes was savage, monster, devil.
Okay, so according to her, this savage, devil, monster language was language that he used after being violent with her. And that's possible. It's possible. It's possible that she's just not a good documentary person of those events, meaning she didn't take very good pictures, or her bruises didn't show very much, or she didn't record during those moments very well. It's possible that he was violent with her, and he is admitting that in those texts. But if you're a juror or someone watching this from the outside, you just have to wonder, okay, well, it could mean a lot of things. It could mean that you were just verbally fighting, which can be really awful and abusive. But if you're claiming violence, where's the evidence? Now, pro-Amber people would say there are pictures of bruises, so there is that. So, I don't know. I'm guessing that there were times when he was violent with her and would use this language afterwards. Having said that, could you believe that and also believe that Amber Heard was liable because she painted a much different picture about their relationship when she wrote that piece in the Washington Post? I think you could claim that.
But I tried. And worse, I would yell at him, I'd scream at him, I'd call him ugly names. So ashamed of the names we'd call each other. It was awful. It was awful. We both got into that pattern. It was so, I felt so angry that this was happening to me, and it just felt so unfair.
Okay, so according to her testimony, I think what she's saying, and I didn't show all of it, is that she would put up with the violence and the abuse, and then eventually she started to fight back with verbal and physical. Is that possible? Yeah, absolutely. We wouldn't know, because the hard evidence that we have, the witness accounts, we have a very limited look into their entire relationship. So could we just be witnessing moments where it looks like she's being abusive when in fact she's mainly defending herself or temporarily enraged because of the abuse that she's been incurring for years behind the scenes? It's possible. It's not likely. Usually, given the profile and the accounts, the audio recordings, it doesn't have that feel to it. So I'll tell you, this is actually, I guess, my expertise that I can tell you is that not always, but the way that she talks in the audio recordings when she's saying, like, go ahead, tell people you're abused, see what they say. And she is, I didn't hit you, I didn't punch you, I hit you. And you're a baby, just berating. I don't usually hear that from victims who are defending themselves. Can they exhibit that behavior? Yeah, because they've incurred it, they've heard it from their partner and often from their childhood. So it's in there, ready to go, and when they are stressed out and backed up into a corner. But typically, 95+% of the time, a victim, in my experience, they're always trying to get safe. They just want to get away. They just want it to end. In fact, the way that Johnny Depp talks about the way that he was physical with her, she would start to hit him, and then he's trying to get away from her, and who knows if any of this is true, but she's hitting him in the back. He turns around and bear hugs her and is trying to get her to stop. There's some accidental head-nose contact, and then when she's like, yelling at him and saying, you broke my nose, she walks away and he stays in the bathroom. So that's the kind of thing I will hear from victims. They're usually in this constant state of they just want to be safe. They just want it to end. And sometimes that means they have to put hands on. Like another story that I'll tell you is this is actually a male victim of intimate partner violence, and the wife was smaller, but big enough, I guess, to impose some physical threat, but still smaller. But anyway, and they were in an argument, and they were in a public place, and she was starting to escalate. This is told to me by both of them, by the way. She's starting to escalate, and by the way, she did suffer from borderline, and I forget for him, but she was getting triggered and she was starting to escalate, and they're in the restaurant and they're in a booth and he's on the inside seat. So he can't just get out of the booth. He has to go through her, right? And so as she's starting to escalate, he's starting to freak out and go, uh-oh, it's happening in this restaurant. And I'm trapped in the booth. I need to get out of here. Before it gets out of control, he starts to say, hey, I need to go to the bathroom. Can you let me out? And she's like, no, you're not. And now, if you've never been in an abusive relationship, you might think, well, what's the big deal? If you have been in an abusive relationship, you know exactly what's happening right now, because the victim knows, oh crap, we've crossed the line. I'm in trouble. They have decided that they want to control me. They're going to get me. We're in a public place. She's the woman. I'm the man. I'm bigger. If this comes to blows and police or employees start coming, I'm going to get blamed. So what do I do, right? And then, again, this is both their stories. So, and I wasn't there, so I'm trying to piece together what they were both telling me. Then he starts to go into this mode of just like, oh crap. But at some point, and he's trying to appease, like, no, I just, I'm tired. Can we just go home? This kind of talk, please, but it's like, oh God, oh God, oh God, oh God. And the abusive person is like, okay, you've crossed the line. You're in trouble, buddy. And you are now under my thumb, essentially. And I will not let you do anything. It's my show, not yours. And the husband eventually is just like, screw it. It was sort of at a point of that. And they both tell me that he pushed her. He pushed her out of the booth and stood up because, I don't know, maybe he was freaking out or something. So in that instance, we have the first violent act, the only violent act from the husband. But the husband is absolutely the victim. Believe me, it's the pattern. It was years and years of this. And so he pushes her out. She doesn't, to my memory, have an event in that moment. They go outside, and that's when the event happens. And she starts to rail and scream, and now he feels like I can run if I need to. I'm not blocked in. We're not in a confined restaurant space. Anyway, that's the kind of behavior. So push because I want to get out, and I already asked you to get out, and then I get out, and then I just want to get out of this restaurant. So the violence was because I want to be free. I need to get my freedom. I need you to get off of me. I might even punch you. It wouldn't be usual, but it's the only violent act. So that's usually what I'll hear. What I won't hear is someone coming after somebody. You know what I mean? You didn't, as soon as he stood up from the table, according to their story to me, he didn't then go after her. He immediately wants to get out of the restaurant. He wants to get away from her. He wants to get away from the context. He's trying to escape. And so we also heard that from Johnny Depp, according to his testimony, that he wanted to leave and she barred his exit and he put his hands on and sat her down on the bed. That is a violent, hostile act, but it is along those lines. So we haven't really heard that from Amber Heard, really. We haven't heard or seen strong evidence around those kinds of behaviors, right? But I don't know. It could have happened. And this does actually, the way she's telling the story, I haven't included all of it, it does start to sway me a little bit. Because I can absolutely see where in the beginning she is trying to make things work, and they both will yell at each other, but him more than her. He is having drunken cocaine rages and would be, abusive, not extensively, but there would be a slap now and then or a kick now and then. She is trying to get out of the relationship. Al-Anon, he gets sober. And then he's getting a little better with his rage and with his violence because he's starting to get help. But her issues are still around, and she starts to introduce violence back into the relationship, or I don't know. Now, according to her, it was reactive to him. She wanted to fight back, which I could see. But again, given the behavior, it doesn't really. So it does make me wonder if we were a fly in the wall, we would see a different relationship before he quit opiates than after. And before, it was a lot of her doting and a lot of him having a lot of erratic behavior and occasionally a slap or a kick, and maybe her participating a little bit. And then later on, the relationship progresses and she's now the main perpetrator of the abuse. That is one profile of bidirectional intimate partner violence, by the way. So, I don't know. What do you think?
No phone, but screaming the same thing. I fucking hate you. You ruined my fucking life. I'm on the countertop. It had me by the neck. And he felt like he was on top of me, and I'm looking at him in his eyes, and I don't see him anymore. I don't see him anymore. It wasn't him. It was black. I've never been so scared in my life. It was black. I couldn't see him, and he was looking at me, and I was trying to get through to him. I was trying to say to him in some way.
Okay, so I haven't been showing all the testimony, but I'll try to summarize it. If we take her word for it and her emotional expression as accurate and truthful, then she's remembering a very traumatic event for her, and you can hear it in her voice. Looked at another way, it's a bad acting job. And which one do I think it is? I don't know. At first, I was thinking, oh, she's going into some trauma for her. That's what it sounds like. But the more you kind of pay attention, it doesn't seem truthful. I don't want to say that about her. I can't remember a time in my life when I would have ever said that about someone, but I'm not usually in this context, so it's against the grain for me. But if I put my money down, I would say there's truth to what she's saying, and she knows that if she plays up a certain emotion that is there for her, but maybe not to this extent, then maybe, or she thinks it will help her case. That would be my guess. Could it be a complete fabrication? Yeah, the story's pretty elaborate though, and given everything we've heard, it could be true. I think most people believe that she's completely lying here. None of us can know that, of course. But just as I've been taking notes as we've gone along, there's been some interesting things that she's been saying. Part of the thing is, since we're post-verdict right now, I don't want to bore people with all the ins and outs of this trial. I feel like I kind of want to get through this for your sake and my sake as, efficiently as possible. I'm gonna comment, but I don't feel like commenting on every little detail. But she talked a while back about how he had offered her MDMA, and she says, if you knew where I was coming from, you would know that was crazy, because I had worked so hard to get him to be sober that for him to offer me drugs was total insanity. And that sounded credible to me, actually. It was a nuance and a detail, and said in a way that, because when he was talking about, oh yeah, she uses drugs all the time, and when even his lawyer asked him, okay, how often did she use? He said something like, well, once a year she would use ecstasy or something like that. And I'm like, I don't think we would characterize that as all the time. I might be exaggerating a little bit, but I remember thinking, so you're really trying to shove that round peg into the square hole regarding making a point that she did use drugs all the time. And given her narrative about trying to get him sober and how desperate she wanted the relationship to work out, how much she was in love with him, how bad it was when he was intoxicated. Was he abusive during that time? We don't know. At the very least, he would be distant and, unreachable during those moments. At the very least, hostile in all likelihood. But she was talking about how he was offering her drugs, and she's just like, no. And then he starts to say, well, you haven't made it illegal legal for me to not use MDMA, so I'm going to use MDMA today. And that sounds like a very credible story as well. It's possible it's a lie, but given everything we've heard, I would not be surprised if Johnny Depp had behaviors like this. He, as I've been saying throughout, he doesn't sound like someone, at least back then, who was fully in recovery. And since he's a polysubstance user and it's his primary way of coping with emotions, which he's probably never coped with sober for very long, since he's now sober off of a lot of things, he's trying to play around with substances. And he even told a story himself around how he had a sip of champagne and then he goes to dinner with Amber and he's like, I'm going to have champagne tonight. Now, he would say, how come she's drinking? And maybe she did drink, and maybe there's a conversation there, but that doesn't negate his responsibility to sobriety. You know, if someone has a massive problem, as Johnny Depp does, according to him, with substances, and your spouse is using, that doesn't mean that gives you a license to throw your sobriety out the window, right? Plus, why are you looking for a license to throw your sobriety out the window? Shouldn't you be the one in charge of your sobriety? Now, if you have a partner that's using, you should probably ask them to not use. And if you are a partner of someone that's going through fragile early recovery, you should try to refrain if you can. And if you can't, you might need treatment yourself. At the very least, you don't want to use in front of them. But anyway, so she's talking about how he would this evening use a lot of MDMA. Maybe he was using it frequently. And she even said something like, I know I'm not supposed to be the police of him. I'm not in charge of his recovery, but it kind of became that. I believe that too, given his ambiguity, his ambivalence about wanting to recover and be sober, and given her codependent nature that she reported to her therapist, I wouldn't be surprised if they developed into a very problematic dynamic where she was the police. She was the sober police and he was complying but trying to get away with using behind the scenes. And that's a very destructive dynamic when someone's going through recovery. It's tempting to the partners, especially if you're codependent and especially if you don't know how to be a partner to someone as they're going through recovery. But anyway, so she mentioned that, and that sounded believable. Then he said it was okay for, and then they get into a fight around, I think, him using. It sounded like a fight about him using. And according to her, he just completely flew off the handle and was instantly violent with her. She didn't do anything wrong. And is that possible? Maybe. Absolutely, it's possible. None of us were there. There's no recording. There weren't any witnesses. But what's more likely to have happened was her admission that she's the police officer, and what we heard on the tape, that she probably started to berate him and say, I can't believe you're using. What's wrong with you? Things escalate. You're going to ruin our relationship, which you could say is a rational thing to say, but not a constructive thing to say in the moment. He starts to defend himself because he absolutely needs substances. He cannot function without at least having some line on some substance. And they escalate. She was probably physical. He was probably physical. They're being physical with each other. Now, according to her, at some point, he throws her across the room. Was that because he was exhibiting his abusive nature, or was it defensive, or was it mutual in the moment? I don't know. Then she claims that he choked her, pushed her up against the wall, was choking her. It's a pretty awful description. I don't know what to think of that. I think most people believe that she's lying about it, but I don't know. It could have happened, and I'll never know. None of us will. It's just between them. So I don't know. Could have happened. I don't know what percentage I would put at, maybe a 30-40% chance that could have happened. But again, what is she leaving out, if anything? I don't know. Then there's another incident, or it continues throughout the night or something. He's hitting her during a fight, and while he's drunk at this point, I believe, and they're fighting about their use. She admitted to breaking an alcohol bottle on the ground, and then, it just gets really detailed in terms of the story of him elaborately beating her and throwing her around, and her thinking she's going to die, this kind of thing. And then she gets to this point. So, I don't know. What do you think? Do you think that there's some truth to this incident? Because it's pretty horrific. Even if this story was half true, and none of the other stories were true, could she have legitimately written that piece or made that claim in the Washington Post that she was a survivor of intimate partner violence? I would say yes, right? She's leaving out the context of her being violent as with him and abusive to him, but I don't know. And what I've been saying kind of from the beginning is, in order to, especially if both people are being violent and verbally abusive and other things, we have to really know what's going on inside of their emotional center, because someone can be abusive to someone, but if this person is not made to be afraid, then they will not feel abused because they have power. They have ways of getting out of it. They can retain onto their individuality and their autonomy, and they can get away. And even if this is repeated, this individual isn't, I wouldn't characterize this person as being abused. We would characterize this person as being abusive, but we wouldn't say that this person is being abused. Like if I were to work at a job where customers were frequently abusing me, but I'm like, well, I'm at work and there's a plexiglass thing and I'm okay. I don't worry about it. I'm trained to deal with it. I wouldn't feel abused. The people are being abusive, but I'm not being controlled. I don't feel unsafe. But I could look like I feel safe, but I might be on the inside terrified. And so if you're from the outside looking at the situation, you wouldn't know until you asked me, do you feel safe? Do you feel afraid? Are you having trouble sleeping? Are you developing trauma symptoms? And I would be the only one to be able to report that in all likelihood. So a lot of it depends on how they felt as things were happening. Were you made to feel very afraid and then you were striking back because of that? Or were you just striking back at someone because you feel like you're entitled and you're upset at them and you just want to control them? The other aspect of this is you can feel afraid and abused when someone is not abusing you. Someone can be speaking to you in a non-abusive way and treating you in a non-abusive way, but you can distort things such that you feel unsafe. You feel like you're being abused. So again, just going off the way someone feels and reports, we can't know if they're actually being abused. There are signs of that, but we would have to actually look at the broader picture, because this person claims to be abused by their partner could be distorting things quite drastically. Now, I want to say this trial, and I think what people want me to comment on, puts me into this very weird position. As a therapist and as a past forensic psychologist, I would occasionally kind of dip into that in forensics, but not usually. Even as someone who treated perpetrators in the past, I'm not usually tasked with trying to figure out if people are lying or not. I'm tasked with helping people who are willing to tell me what's happening. Perpetrators will tell me that they're a perpetrator. They won't name themselves as a perpetrator, but they'll tell me the things that they did, or I'll hear from the victim and I'll say, "Did you do that?" And they'll be like, "Yeah, I did that, but I didn't mean it that way." And I'm like, well, and in my head, I'm like, well, that's abusive, and I might have to walk them down the road. So I'm not used to hearing a story like this and trying to determine if they're lying about it. That's just it's not a context that I'm typically in. When I hear stories like this in my office, it's usually true, or at the very least, if I believe it, there's not a lot of consequence to it because this isn't some sort of court situation. So let's say someone came in and did lie about this and I believed it, I would just proceed with treatment and explore their feelings, but I wouldn't go after the perpetrator. I wouldn't make a police report. There's no consequence to me believing someone. So I might hear a story and wonder, I wonder if that's a little exaggerated or so, but it doesn't matter because the person is there to heal or to talk about things, to explore themselves. I'm there to create a space where they can do that and to provide some education or some corrective experiences for them. It depends on what we're doing. But so I just want to say that I don't feel comfortable evaluating the truthfulness of her statement. It runs against everything that I do and really everything that I believe in. That when people tell these stories, it's really important that we listen to them. We don't have to believe them 100%, but we don't want to lead with that question of like, are they telling the truth, right? But of course, that's this entire trial. So it's not unusual for the trial. It's not unusual for the jury. It's imperative that they actually evaluate and ask that question to themselves. But I'm just telling you, for me, it's really hard for me to, when I start going down there, I'm like, this is not comfortable for me, especially as a man listening to a woman tell a story and for me to go like, I'm not sure. And, I didn't do that as much with Johnny Depp. There wasn't a lot of reasons to, though, honestly, because there was audio to back it up and witnesses, and the way he was telling the story didn't really lend itself to even evaluating the way he was telling a story. He could have been lying the entire time. So, but I also will say the question as to whether or not Johnny Depp is lying is less of an issue as to whether or not Amber Heard is lying, right? Because that's the question. Is she liable for what she said? And was it in malice and all that kind of stuff? And so I guess that's why there's more scrutiny around it. But so I don't know about Amber Heard, but I do want y'all to know that therapists do not typically question clients that come in. Sometimes there's a fault to that, because if I'm asked to provide testimony or expert opinion, like with Dr. Hughes, when she just believes everything that was said, then we're stepping into some very dubious areas. But I don't do that, and ethical treating professionals, clinicians don't do that either. It's clear in the ethics that if you're treating someone, you can't provide a professional opinion about the truthfulness of what the client is saying. You can report what they're saying if you're supposed to, but you can't say as to whether or not it's true or not, because that's for a different professional that has the clean role of being only an examiner and not a treater of that person anyway. So know that therapists generally believe and won't even have a question mark in their mind. They might be a little skeptical of the degree or of wondering about what the other people would say, but generally speaking, it's a warm environment. You can talk about your feelings. So I want that to be clear. Also, if you ever hear a story like this from a friend or something, depending on the situation, but most of the time, you generally want to believe them. Now, if they're asking you to go to bat for them, well, then you're like, well, I don't know. I believe you, but I can't know for sure that what you're telling me is true. I believe you, and I want to be there for you, but I can't officially say anything about what you're saying because I wasn't there, that kind of thing. So I don't want there to be this skepticism around people. There's already too much of that anyway. We don't want to use our mindset with this case outside of this case unless it calls for it.
Thank you. Please, God, please. I hope it's not broken.
Okay, so I'm not going to show all of what she's saying because, one, I think it'll trigger people severely, and two, I think YouTube would have a problem with this. She's talking about being assaulted with a bottle, and I knew about this story. I'd heard people refer to it. I didn't know how it was presented, but she's talking about it right now. Is it possible that this happened? Yeah, it is possible. I imagine most people, including the jury, would be skeptical about this. Johnny Depp doesn't really have a profile. The way that she's describing this whole event, it's like a complete psychopathic, rageful attack, just brutal and ongoing and multi-dimensional and ruthless and cruel, and we're talking like Ted Bundy cruel kind of stuff. And does that happen? Yeah, it absolutely does. Meaning that, are there a lot of people who exhibit Ted Bundy cruelty during abusive episodes? Yeah, absolutely. It happens a lot. But there's not a lot of corroborating evidence around this sort of thing. But anyway, if this is true, it is horrific and elaborate and cruel, like I said, and upsetting. So if you've been assaulted like this, or in any way, especially if you have PTSD, I would not watch these clips. It's awful. She is crying a lot. There was a period where she was sobbing and she couldn't talk. That seemed like real crying to me. It seems to be a little exaggerated, but again, as I've been saying, she's on the stand, she's on TV, she's worried that people won't believe her. Maybe it's real and she amps it up because she's trying to come across a certain way. I don't know. It could be completely fabricated, or who knows. Or it could be all real. Could be all real. Could be real. This could have happened. It's hard to believe, though, right? Not because, Johnny wouldn't do this, because of course that's an idiotic thought. But it just seems like that sort of behavior doesn't usually just emerge suddenly in some. Now, could it have been a psychotic episode and he did it? Yeah. I've actually treated clients who had psychotic episodes from drug use who did things like this. And it was just that one night because they had a delusion or some weird impulse that was only present when they were having an episode on a particular drugs, particularly amphetamine, meth, this cocaine, this sort of thing. So was it that? It doesn't sound like it. So I don't know. But if she went through this, that is awful. Truly. If she went through it, that is awful.
Johnny took his penis out of his pants and started trying to pee or peeing outside of the house, saying that he had more messages for me. And this is in front of security. And they kind of just like looked at each other and looked at him and kind of not laughed, but kind of half, played it off and corralled.
Okay, possible. I think what she's talking about is the event in which he lost his finger, the portion of his finger. I think as she was building up to this story, I thought we were talking about something completely different, but I think she's talking about that day that his finger was lost. And I think what she's saying is the whole event leading up to going to the hospital about his finger was he was being abusive on this astronomical level. I think it's the same day. I can't really tell. She says she comes downstairs. I don't know. I'm waiting for her to say, and that's when I discovered the finger was gone. Because she's saying there was blood everywhere. He was drawing letters around with blood, and I think we did see some pictures of that. And I think that's why she said earlier that she broke a bottle. She admits that she did break a bottle on the ground. I don't know. And I think she's going to say that he abused, he cut his own finger off or something like that. If that's true, which I'm not really quite sure yet because I'm not following the entire narrative here, then wow. I mean, so who's telling the truth? I don't know. But if Johnny Depp is telling the truth, or at least close to it, for Amber Heard to try to spin that around. So one element about this story that doesn't add up is that she comes downstairs and there's blood everywhere on the walls, on his hands. Help is coming. So according to her, he asks her for coffee or Red Bull or something, and she's like, hum-de-dum, okay, coffee. He throws the coffee and she's like, that doesn't add up. If you come downstairs, even if you were in some sort of a fight with your partner, well, I suppose if you're claiming that he had abused you and assaulted you, SA'd you, I don't know what words is going to be flagged on YouTube, but then maybe you would be in a dissociative state, a PTSD triggered state, a traumatized state. So there's that. If that's not the case, then you come downstairs, you see blood, you think you would just be freaking out. What's going on? How come there's so much blood? Do you think you'd just be, do you have blood on you? I don't know. It just doesn't seem to add up. And that's one thing that I think might have swayed the jury and I think the public is the way Johnny Depp tells the stories. It all kind of makes sense. It could be all lies, but it's easy to follow. Her stories, I'm like, now she would say, and it's possible absolutely, that she doesn't remember things linearly because it's all kind of jumbled up, which is absolutely what would happen if you had a massive multi-event assault episode where you're the victim. So, I don't know.
Him. It was how it looked. It looked like corralling a wild animal back into the house with his penis still out of his pants, peeing or trying to pee. That's what he was indicating. And he went to the wall of the house. And I remember him standing at the wall trying to leave me more, saying he had more information for me. He was going to leave me more messages, more information for me. It made no sense.
Okay, so she's claiming that he had his thing out. Again, I don't know what's going to get flagged. And that he was, again, even that story, she first says he was urinating and then later says, I don't know if he was trying to. So I think what she's saying is that he was so intoxicated that he wasn't coherent. And then he's grabbing her and saying, I need to get something across to you. And she's like, you're confused. Okay. Possible. Yeah. I don't know what to make of it, though.
With them about how much they were trying to give me, I felt like I needed to figure out what was happening with my life, what was happening with Johnny. I didn't know if he was okay. I didn't know. I actually had no idea, like, could this be something he could die from? If anything, just the drugs and the alcohol. I mean...
You know what I mean? She could be a traumatized individual and it's jumbling things up for her. absolutely possible. I've had clients like that, absolutely. In fact, it's a known feature as people start to go into their trauma narratives that it will be jumbled up at first, and I always allow for that for people. It's like, take your time. It doesn't need to make sense. We'll get there eventually, but just keep talking, and we'll monitor your distress level. Remember your emotional regulation skills. Where is your distress? It's all part of exposure therapy, imaginal exposure, and so it could be that. But given that she's on the stand and she's already testified about this before, she's had many years to prepare for this, it just kind of comes out jumbled. Could that be a feature of PTSD? Absolutely. I don't know. So let's say that she is telling some truth, if not a lot of it. I think she could have been hindered by the fact that just the way she tells stories, for whatever reason, it doesn't help that she's kind of coming at it from all different layers. She kind of comes in and out of her experience, and there are things that don't make some sense. Like, she says she comes downstairs and there's blood everywhere, but she doesn't mention like how she reacts to that blood. Then she is the nurse and the security person arrives, or whoever Jerry Judge is, and they shuffle her off to this other room, and the nurse is trying to give her drugs, trying to make her take a sedative, and she claims she's trying to fight that off. Does that sound likely that the nurse would be like, take this drug? It doesn't seem like, but it's possible, I guess. And then you're like, well, why would someone be trying to give you a sedative? Like, what was going on? And of course we have the audio. I still haven't heard her say the finger bit yet, but we have heard the audio there, right? Of her saying, I didn't mean to, all that kind of stuff. So it just doesn't lend itself to credibility. It could be true though, or at least some of it could be true. But if you're on the jury and you're trying to believe, you're trying to figure out what seems believable, she doesn't help herself by the way she tells stories, I think. I don't know. What do you think?
That alone, I didn't, I just remember being scared and being in this theater room, this dark theater room, and not knowing what the heck was going on. I eventually was taken up to my room by one of the nurses, and I'm sorry, Debbie, and or suggesting I go up to my room. I went up to my room, and
another aspect that you would think would be present in the concrete data evidence, if these sorts of events were true, that during the audio recordings there'd be some reference to it by either one of them, which to my memory there wasn't. There is reference to her hitting him and her admitting to that. There's lots of reference of him leaving whenever they get escalated. And his version of this story was that's what was happening. He was trying to get away from her, had locked himself in the bathroom, and she's pounding on the door. Then she walks away, and then he's like, waits for a while. Is she there? He walks out, goes behind the bar, and he's like, screw it, I'm going to drink. And he starts drinking. She comes down, she throws the bottle at him. She throws another bottle at him. That's when the finger comes off. She puts the cigarette out on him. And the story all just kind of holds together. It coincides with the audio and the witness accounts, and her story could be true, but there's just nothing to grab onto. And I'm kind of looking for that. I'm thinking like, okay, is there something, and maybe there will be in future testimony, but I'm like, is there anything that I can grab onto to corroborate this extreme abuse that she went through? Is there anything we can grab onto? Is there any sort of hard evidence that we can grab onto? Or is there lots of evidence to the contrary, right? So you've heard me talk about this before, and of course I have no idea, but with histrionic individuals, they are sometimes prone to lying. Not all people who are conceptualized as having histrionic personality disorder will do this, but and I've said this before, but just to remind everyone, because it could be happening right now, or at least that's what Dr. Curry might propose, that when the child is very young, they are going through abuse often, and they are not getting enough attention. And so they learn that in order to be safe, they must get attention at all times. And so they don't want attention just because they want attention. They want attention because they equate it with safety, a lack of abuse, a lack of danger, a lack of threat, because that to the 2-year-old, to the 5-year-old, often is a logical calculation that they're making based on the environment and the way in which they're being abused and the way in which they're being saved from the abuse. Like, they might perceive the other parent who is less abusive to be their savior, and if they can garner a lot of attention from that person and do a lot of song and dances, maybe lie, maybe like, ow, daddy's hitting me, and then mommy comes around the corner and daddy wasn't hitting, but the child felt like maybe daddy would hit her or something like that. Kind of locks this in neurologically. And to the child, and you all know this if you have young children, sometimes they don't know the difference between fantasy and reality, right? And so you end up making up stories, and if you ask the kid, are you telling the truth? They will often think, yes, I am, because they don't really have the development yet or the brain power yet to differentiate between truth and fiction. And so they will start to do that a lot, and then you just keep doing it, sort of locks it in terms of a survival mechanism that kicks in whenever you're threatened. And you don't know the difference between reality and fiction. And when you feel like you're unsafe, like you're going through a divorce, or you have been divorced and you feel very alone in the world, and from reports, she tends to ruin a lot of relationships, then you'll do a lot of things to try to get safety, to try to get people to care about you and be with you and secure with you. And you might resort to this early childhood mechanism of just crying wolf all the time and just having elaborate, very lengthy stories that maybe even you kind of believe, but really don't make sense to the outside world. And there's no evidence that it's real. And it's a compulsive act. It's not a calculated act. It's not Machiavellian. It's not psychopathic. It's something that they're doing out of desperation. And that's why we call it a personality disorder. And I feel like I always need to emphasize that people frame personality disorders on the internet as if people wake up in the morning and go like, ha ha ha, I'm going to be narcissistic today because I'm special and I'm better than other people. No, the narcissist is reacting out of absolute desperation. They are suffering more than if you don't have a personality disorder or disorganized attachment or something, or you're not in chronic pain. If you don't have one of the major human suffering experiences, you will never know how much the narcissist is suffering on a minute-by-minute basis. Same with histrionic, same with borderline, particularly if you're at the upper level of the severity of those disorders. And so the lying behavior is born out of absolute pain and absolute terror and feeling completely worthless, feeling completely alone, feeling completely in danger, and it just sort of starts spewing out of your mouth. And you think you're getting the job done. That's what it feels like to the individual. It's like, okay, I'm running away from safety, and they feel like they're running away from the threat. I'm running away from the threat. Okay, just keep lying, just keep making up. I'm getting attention. People are paying attention to me. They're listening to me. I'm saying this. I'm using lots of facial expressions, and I'm crying a lot, and I'm saying a lot of details that would really garner a lot, and everyone's really looking at me and paying attention. Okay, I'm running towards safety and away from danger. But from the outside, when we look at the individual using this metaphor, they are not moving anywhere away from the danger. In fact, there isn't really a danger. They're just making up a bunch of lies. In fact, people are paying attention to them, but emotionally, they're moving away from you because they're like, I think this person is unhinged or lying or something. And so the person feels as though they're running towards security when in fact, there's nothing to really be running from, and they're pushing everyone away from them, which causes more reason to keep running. It's similar with borderline. That with borderline, the individual feels like they're running towards security away from abandonment by being hypervigilant, by being preoccupied, by maybe even being demanding, by assuming that there's abandonment and betrayal around every corner and really questioning people all the time. And they're doing that, and they're feeling, okay, I'm running away from the threat, when in reality, they're pushing everyone away, and they don't feel it. They don't understand it. It's like, I'm working on these things. How come I never manage to get secure? It just never happens. Like, I keep trying and I keep putting all this effort into it. How come nothing ever works out for me? I don't understand, It'd be like you're pressing on the gas of your car and you're going back, you're not moving anywhere. You're just like, how come everyone else seems to, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And so it could be happening with her in this moment. And we use it as a jumping off point. So if someone had histrionic, this would be a presentation of that. But she could be telling the truth as well. So, and if you're a clever forensic psychologist and you want to be very helpful to the lawyers that hired you and to the plaintiff, then you would label someone as histrionic because that is a reason to completely throw everything that person says into question, because it's known that they sometimes will lie. So, I don't want to assume that she has histrionic. I don't assume she has histrionic, but it is kind of interesting to think about, right? But I also want to hold out, she could be telling the truth entirely. None of us were there, and no witnesses saw this. It's just like, who tells the story that seems to make sense given everything else? And most people agree that Johnny was at least telling more of the truth in this instance as well.
Like in this ugly brown color, he wrote on the walls going downstairs. Like it took in fact, you could see where it looked like he had run out of blood, because the messages became, the markings became clearly letters. And the letters kind of became, like I could see.
Yeah, that does lend credibility to her story. I mean, not what she's saying right now, but the general gist of what she's saying, which is, and I'm pretty sure we are talking about the finger event, right? Because we're talking about Australia right now, and it did happen there. So we did know from Johnny Depp and others that when his finger was severed, he did write in blood and various different things around their dwelling. And at first you're just like, well, he's in a really bad state. But on the other hand, because according to him, he hadn't been using anything and she was being abusive. He comes out, goes to the bar, and he just has like a couple drinks before she throws 2 bottles at him, finger comes off. And then at that point, you start, I don't know if I have all the, and please don't hate me for not understanding all the details closely. I've been watching this trial over weeks and weeks and weeks, and sometimes I forget. But if I have this right, then it does sort of lend itself to Amber Heard's story, because if you just forget about these 2 people, if you just said, like, if you just came on the scene and you saw someone had written in blood all over the place and also used paint. She's talking about how he ran out of blood and then he started using paint to write things out. And the person in question had their finger cut off, and the partner is like, I don't know what's going on right now. Or I think he did this to himself, and he's saying, she did this to me. If that's true, then why are you doing all this other stuff? And of course, there are accounts of him telling people that he did it to himself. Now, he would say it's because he was trying to protect her, or he just didn't want to get into it with those people, which is absolutely believable given the circumstance. But it is interesting, right, that we heard the threats with the knife. We heard the multiple accounts of him having pretty interesting episodes on substances. He's admitted himself that the demon comes out when he uses, and he's drawing all these things everywhere. It is kind of interesting, right? And it's possible. Now, there's that audio. In fact, let's review the audio again. I've pulled it up here, and let's listen to it here. Okay, I can't really tell what's being said, so I actually looked up a transcript. I can't verify the accuracy of the transcripts, but it looks pretty accurate. We're about 7 minutes into the audio. I didn't realize there was so much audio. I'm waiting to hear Amber Heard say, like, I didn't mean to, or I can't remember exact words that she says, but I think we're earlier than this. And there's a fair amount of time from when people actually show up. They were looking for the finger for a while. I think they found it. They were getting ice. Jerry Judge is on the phone. And I have a transcript here of what he was saying. He says, okay, all right. I hear what you're saying. Look, I've seen Johnny hurt. I've never seen him this hurt ever. I'm not saying that he wrecked this place. I mean, it's wrecked. The window's broken, the TV. She did it. There was a cup thrown. It missed. There's been bottles thrown. And she admits to me she threw the first. She threw a bottle at him. She did it first. She admits to me that. And I said to her, and then there's something that he says that's inaudible. And she says, I disagreed and refused to do it in my temper. She says, I disagreed and refused to do it in my temper. And then Jerry Judge says, and he was shouting at her, screaming at her. She has scratches on her left arm, which Debbie told about. Look, I've seen those scratches before on other people, and as far as I'm concerned, they're self-inflicted. I'm convinced of that, self-inflicted. how would you know that? I mean, I didn't see the wounds, but so if you see scratches on your arm, they're self-inflicted. Okay. And yeah, there's more commentary here from this author. I don't know who wrote this. Serpentine Eyelash. Why does nobody seem concerned about Amber Heard's alleged injuries from her head being bashed against the wall and the bar, her entire body being bashed against the wall, her neck being choked, so this is all that same incident that we heard. Her jaw being punched, her entire body being flung across the room onto a collapsing table, her spine being bent over backwards, her being penetrated, her feet walking on broken glass, her entire body being dragged naked over broken glass, and so on. And yet there's no visible signs of any of that, or very little of that. There's also commentary here saying that maybe she was having some kind of event, some kind of drug-fueled rage or confusion, and it wasn't Johnny Depp. So because there are reports of her taking Ambien. Ambien doesn't usually cause that sort of thing. It can cause blackouts, but not like violent rage, abusive behavior. But if you're already prone to abuse, might the Ambien be another factor that can create something? I don't know. That sounds a little funny.
And she admitted also that she hit him first. She actually hit him in the face. She admits to me she threw a bottle on me. She hit first.
Okay, so according to Jerry Judge, he's saying that she admitted to him that she had punched him first and that she had thrown the first bottle at him. Okay, he's an employee of Johnny Depp. He has shown maybe a little bit of bias against Amber Heard because he saw scratches and was completely convinced they were self-inflicted. That's pretty dubious. So it shows potential bias on his part. But he doesn't know he's being recorded right now. But you could see if you're on Johnny Depp's side, it might be your job to kind of clean up his messes by getting out ahead of these situations and creating a narrative that isn't necessarily true to protect him. But anyway, at the very least, we have this, which is interesting. Okay, so according to this audio, she's saying that she's popping a lot of different things, Xanax, Adderall, other substances. I think that contradicts her story as well. Okay, so she's talking to Dr. Kipper and the nurse and saying, I love him. I never meant to hurt him. I didn't do it on purpose. I never meant to hurt him. Okay, so is that consistent with her story? No, it's not. Could someone be in a state where they're just saying those sorts of things because they don't know what else to say? Is it metaphorical, like, I didn't mean to hurt his feelings, which resulted in him cutting off his finger and spreading blood everywhere? Maybe. But if her story was true, you'd just think that there would be more corroborating evidence. There would be visible signs of her having been assaulted. There would not be these inconsistent stories about her using drugs when she says she wasn't when she was. There would be obvious signs of physical trauma. I mean, the way she's describing it, she was brutalized for a long period of time in multiple ways, choked and punched and slapped and assaulted and glassed, and it was brutal. And to have no signs of that, and we would imagine she would take a picture of it, right? And then to hear her right after saying, I didn't do it on purpose, I didn't mean to hurt him. I mean, it's hard to believe her story. And if she is lying, which a lot of arrows are pointing in that direction, I mean, my goodness. All right, well, that does it for that episode. Everyone out there, please take care of yourself because you deserve it. You really, really do.